Altogether, we finish the Torah in an entire year, but we also read a Haftarah every Shabbos. That came from the fact that at one point in Jewish history, we were not permitted by the occupiers who at that point controlled us. We were not permitted to have a public Torah reading, a public reading from the 5 books of Moses. Even the non-Jews understand that the 5 books of Moses are especially holy, especially unique and special and holy. And so they forbade, as much as they allowed the fulfillment of the commandments otherwise, and being Jewish, it wasn't like a situation of Hanukkah or Purim, but nevertheless, we were not allowed to have a public Torah reading. What we were allowed to do, however, was to read a selection from the prophets. The prophets are only telling us, when you kind of boil it down, and we'll actually have a reference to this in our Haftarah itself, the prophets are really only telling us to fulfill the Torah anyway. So, of course, they have different messages based on all sorts of different circumstances, time in Jewish history, circumstances of Jewish history, where they're coming from, what the Jewish people are doing at the time. But when you boil it down, it's basically keep what's in the Torah. And the government back then thought that if you can prevent the Jews from reading the Torah publicly, then at least there's going to be some level of mitigation, some level of lessening their connection and fervor to that Torah. You want to read from the prophets? No problem. But the 5 books of Moses? No. What did the sages do? The sages selected sections of the prophets to be read publicly that would remind us, based on their content, what the Torah portion would be were we allowed to read it publicly. And then, at least on a private level, not in a public reading sense, but on an individual level, a person would still be able to keep up with that cycle of the Torah, which would conclude every year, and he would still be, as it were, on schedule. Therefore, every single Haftarah selection, whatever the week is, whatever the custom is, there are different customs amongst Ashkenazim and Sfardim regarding the Haftarah. But whatever the custom is, whatever the selection is, there must be some connection that we can see, that we can find between the content of the Haftarah and the content of the Torah portion. Sometimes it's something relatively easy to see, sometimes not, but there is always a connection. That's what we begin with when we begin to learn the Haftarah.